You're listening to Gamesforum's Mobilize and Monetize podcast. Dive into the world of mobile gaming with us as we explore the latest trends and discuss best practices. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Gamesforum's Mobilize and Monetize podcast. Today, I'm super excited because joining me is none other than Wilfrid Obeng, co-founder and CTO at Audiomob. Wilfrid, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
No, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate the time.
And before we sort of kick off, I kind of want to take a moment to give you your flowers a little bit because it seems like Audiomob's on the up and up. I mean, from the collab you guys had with Google Cloud to, this being certified by the IAB, it seems like everything is just, on the up and up for you guys. So it's really cool to see. So I just wanted to, give you your flowers a little bit before we kick off.
No, I appreciate it, and I can return the favor with Gamesforum. I see the team expanding, and I see the amount of events you're doing is super cool. And I'm also looking forward to Vietnam because I've never been, so it should be a really cool event, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. So, Wilfrid, I'm sure, you've seen the questions. We have so much to get through. So I kind of want to kick off with what's sort of like the million-dollar question. What inspired you to start Audiomob, and how did you sort of identify this need for audio ads in mobile gaming?
Yeah, great question. So I guess me and Christian, who's the co-founder of Audiomob, Christian was making all of these watercolored art games.
Mm,
He really didn't like the soundtracks in these games. So it really was that he didn't like them. So he
interesting.
just thought, is there a way he could replace the soundtrack with like whatever that user who was playing's preference were?
Right.
For example, if they were listening to hip hop, jazz, rock, like then the music would basically be different according to the user. And that's how we first started. Me and Christian met at Google, but then it morphed. The idea morphed when we also were like, well, these video ads are very like annoying. Like they keep blocking me from playing the games.
Mm,
So we then thought, is there an alternative to that? And I think we had this eureka moment where we noticed a lot of the audio advertising spend had been increasing, like
mm.
constantly. And then we just realized, like, one thing to stream audio, and there was so many like label rights issues with that. Like the labels always want to get paid, and artists want to, how do you really attribute who it belongs to and who you have to pay. So
Yeah.
then we realized, what if you replaced the video ad experience with audio ads, which were booming? And then we're like, surely someone's done that. That was really our reaction, was actually that surely someone's done that.
Yeah.
And then we Googled it, funny enough, we're like, oh, no one has actually done that.
Yeah.
Let's actually try this. Let's actually give this a go, because it's obvious. Like eventually everyone will want to do this, because if it means that the players play more of the game, they're less.
Mm.
It's a win-win. The developers make money, and us as game at that moment in time, we were just people who played mobile games have a
Yeah.
better.
That's awesome. So, you touched upon the difference between audio ads and banner ads, for example. So how do you think the audio ads compare to traditional video ads and banner ads, in terms of user retention, let's say?
Yeah, so I think it's been enough time now. So it's 4 years since we first started this journey, since 2020, and I think there's enough time for me to understand that it's been um it's been it's been basically revolutionary in understanding what is actually meant for all of these different partners.
Mm.
So we've actually got the data to actually let me give me 2 seconds. We've got the data to actually see what it actually what that sorry, we have the data that actually shows now that the retention levels are better with audio
Mm.
ads, and in regards to, or in comparison to other formats. So what we've seen is that the users actually engage in the ad more, and they engage with more ads, audio ads, than in comparison to video ads. And that's been a big revelation. But then also, what's been interesting in a load of A/B tests we've did with certain partners, and well, different partners now, actually multiple partners, is that over the same period of time, because of the fact that the user is less annoyed by their experience and their experience being interrupted, it actually means that they are seeing more revenue and actually more retention in their games. So
Interesting.
it means that although our CPMs are not necessarily as high as the highest video ad CPMs, we're still able to give a CPM that is comparable, especially for the amount of ads you can show. And I think there's just places you can't put video ads and you can't put other formats where you can put audio. So like
Mm,
during gameplay levels, users can actually engage with the audio ads, or
yeah.
they can actually just listen to the audio ads while they continue to play their levels and games. So you see that users are less annoyed, even from our focus group data. You also see that users are like, oh no, this makes a lot of sense. Like we just continue to play the game. It's a better value exchange.
Right. So for those interested, can you share some sort of success stories or perhaps some case studies where AudioMob's audio ads have been successful? If it's enhanced the monetization strategy for mobile games.
Yeah. So we have a few examples, and I can touch. I'll give a bit more detail to a few of them that are on our website as well. So like for example, we have a very good relationship with Lockwood, who made Avakin Life, and I think it's one of my favorite case studies because
Mm,
a lot of times people are like, oh, this only works in hyper casual games and there's no other games it works with. But I thought Lockwood was a lovely example of a game that's a 3D world game, and it
mm,
makes a lot of sense, right? So the implementation is, rather than running around the world map to collect the gems, you listen to an audio ad that allows you to continue to play the game. But after the ads finish, you receive all of those gems that you previously had to run around your house to collect.
yeah.
And it became something that even on the forums, and this was the bit I loved about the implementation so much is on the forums, people were asking, oh, when is this coming to our country? Like they're like, oh, there's some users who are telling me about these audio ads that you can use in the US, but it's
Yeah.
not available in our country yet. So actually, from the Lockwood team, we actually were getting that feedback, like, oh, they're actually asking us for like, do you have more audio ads in this country? So or can this feature be enabled? So I think that was the biggest signal that I was like, oh, actually, users want to do this because they see it as a better value exchange. Like
Right.
I'm ever gonna say advertising the best thing since sliced bread, but if there's a better value exchange to be had, why not?
Absolutely. I love that. You're like breaking stereotypes. Like it's not sort of like restrained to one game type. So touching on that. So, you talked a little bit about, other people, other players in different countries wanting to get involved. So, mobile gaming markets are expanding globally. How is AudioMob catering to these sort of diverse player demographics?
Great question, and I think a lot of people in the industry always make a joke like, "Oh, you're always somewhere in the
Yeah.
world." I'm always about somewhere, and the reason for that, and I think this is the greatest thing about our industry, is you can build a game and then suddenly it can be the next biggest. Like you could build a game, you could be based in Finland, and it could be the biggest hit across the whole world.
Yeah.
Everyone is accessible. We have the distribution channels of the play, like not just the Google and Apple Play stores, but so many other now alternative Play stores that have also come up as well.
Yeah.
So um we started in the tier ones, obviously. So when you start a business, you're like, okay, I can't be everywhere. We're only a startup. So we started with obviously the US, the UK, the Germanys, Canadas of the world. And now the reason I'm always traveling to meet our demand partners is now we're trying to expand out of that. So expanded out into Latin America, and we're now also
Hmm.
expanding out into Asia, so like Indonesia, Vietnam, South Korea. And then also touching on Africa as well. So like South Africa, Nigeria, which is a big
Nice.
mobile gaming place. So it started slowly, yes, and we had to start in like tier one tiers in terms of CPMs. But now, as you said, you onboard one game and then you see all of these daily active users across the world. And we're now moving into that, and we also have a big traction in MENA as well, and that's because of our office in Abu Dhabi. So actually, we have a sales team out there who are actually able to get a lot of campaigns in places like Saudi Arabia, UAE, across the GCC,
You guys
Egypt.
are everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's because as you say, gamers are everywhere, so
Yeah.
you have to match it.
That is very true. So, for those, perhaps some of our listeners don't really know much about audio ad formats. So, what are some of the innovative audio ad formats that AudioMob is currently exploring, at the moment?
Yeah, so our first format, and I would say the format that resonates and reason like we started this is rewarded audio. So it's yes, it's similar to rewarded video. You're getting a reward in exchange for listening or watching an ad. In that regard, yes, that's correct. But there are some nuances which are super cool. So because audio means that you can continue to play the game, there are things like we've seen developers do stuff like instant rewards.
Mm,
Actually, like you instantly get the reward, or there's percentage based reward. So how much of the ad you're listening to then affects how much of the reward you get.
yeah.
And it kind of like gamifies what the advertiser wants to happen, which is obviously their brand or their whatever their marketing gets heard over a long period of time or a longer period of time, versus what the player gets. Like maybe it's a power up.
Yeah.
There's some really cool value exchanges that can happen there. And then we have obviously we have a skippable format, which is a bit like if you think about like YouTube, it's after 5 seconds the user can skip it. The interesting thing is like we see like less than 10% of our users actually skip
Interesting.
the skippable ads.
I thought that
And
would be higher. I don't know why. That's really interesting.
yeah, and I think it's also credit to our game developers that we worked with, ethos of where they've placed them. So they're placing them in, and it's also part of our best practices, like what we have seen from data works, and that is putting it in between the levels, and allowing the person to continue to play the level. Because I
Hmm.
think what you find from our focus groups, especially, is the thing that annoyed people the most was that the fact that you play your level, you have such a hit of like, oh, I just completed that level. That was really, hard to do. And I'm now on level 42. And then
Hmm.
suddenly there's like a 30-second ad that's blocked them from going to level 43. And
Yeah.
so that is where we've seen um it's really has got a lot of good feedback from users because it allows them to continue to play and get to their next level while obviously the game developers generate the revenue they need from building these cool experiences.
Right. So not being intrusive seems to be like a key factor there. So how do you sort of like measure the effectiveness of audio ads in mobile games? What sort of metrics are most important for this?
Yeah, so in the audio advertising space, one of the things that is so important for the advertiser and especially the brands is what we call listen through rate. So it's basically how much of the ad has been listened to, which
Mm.
makes sense logically, right? If you have a brand campaign, you've got a message that you're trying to deliver over 30 seconds or 15 seconds, it's about how quickly can you get that message across, and are people actually listening? So and on the listening point, the second and most important thing for them is can it be heard? And this is
Mm.
a big thing for us is that we realize like how can we justify higher CPMs on audio advertising over banner advertising unless it's heard. If you're an audio advertiser, it makes logical sense for example, Spotify and podcast, right? Because you're
Yeah.
not listening to a podcast on mute and you're not listening to Spotify on mute, right?
Yeah.
But you could be listening to a game on mute. Now, our stats show 75% of users have their volume above 10%, which is actually really interesting. But this was something that was really important to us. We don't send any ad requests to our advertisers unless the volume is above 10% on skippables or above 30% on rewarded. And that's why we're able to command a higher CPM or the higher revenues from all of the advertisers because they're like, oh, okay, good. Like we're audio advertiser, we want to know it's heard, and then the
Yeah.
thing we want to know is how much do users listen to it.
Interesting. So it's sort of justified there. So obviously we can't really talk about all the good without touching on some of the limitations. So what are some of the limitations within this space? Can you discuss that? What are things that you've encountered perhaps, in terms of the drawbacks of audio ads within mobile games, and how are you working around that?
Great question. I think the biggest one is on the advertiser side, what we have now is a lot of these advertisers were used to the days of radio. So
Mm.
they're coming with ad formats, some of them 60 seconds from podcasts, because there's the natural break in podcasts where
Yeah.
you have 60 seconds, or they're coming with 30-second ads. And so this has been the biggest education and one of the biggest pain points is explain to them, guys, we can give you so much more scale with all of these games and the amount of, like value exchange you can create by giving someone a power up in a game, which is way higher than any podcast could ever
Mm.
create in terms of the amount of opportunities for brands and advertisers. And it's a great demographic because everyone is mobile gaming. Like
Yeah.
men, women, different ages, demographics. It doesn't matter. Like everyone is now playing mobile games. But it's been definitely an educational experience over the 4 years. Explain to them we don't like our maximum limit is 30 seconds on our network.
Mm.
So a lot of the times like, oh, we can't do our 60 seconds. We're like, no, like it needs to be 30 seconds below. And
Yeah.
even then we're like, no, it's better if you do 15 to 20 seconds
Yeah.
optimum amount. So that has been a drawback in terms of we know game levels in some of these games aren't as long as some of these. And the problem is audio ads are put in places where you can't put video ads. So a video ad can naturally have a progression at the end for 30 seconds, right? Because the game has stopped, full
Mm.
screen is now on the ad. but on the audio ad experience, it can be in levels. So that's why it's super important that we're getting the time frames of the users right. And also just our data shows that users engage the most and enjoy the most um, the ads which are around the 15 to 20-second mark as well.
Interesting. So a lot of myth dispelling there. I can see that. So I'm going to ask you a little bit of a future gazing question, Wilfrid. So, in your opinion, what are some of the major trends that you predict within mobile gaming, and how is AudioMob sort of adapting to these changes? How are they prepared for these changes?
Yeah, I think in the mobile gaming space, we're gonna see a lot more games that are built for, I guess, longer periods of time. And I think the other thing, and when I say long periods of time, it's like there'll be less hyper casual. You're seeing this like everyone's moving more into casual, and
Yeah,
then also mid core, and actually some in some cases like proper PC experiences on mobile, which is
yeah,
also becoming really interestingly popular. So I think that's a trend where I say like most of the games are now converging into something that has more longevity. So the idea isn't to build a game that only lasts, a year. The idea is now to build games that have longer life cycles. So I think that's the first thing. I think one of the most fascinating things I've heard from monetization managers and founders of games companies is how they're applying AI to the user experience of the games and
yeah.
catering everything from the game levels to monetization. So if they know you're a user that doesn't engage at all with video ads or with banner ads or with in-game purchases, they're
Mm,
choosing different paths for different users dynamically. And I think that's really fascinating in terms of you have a proper curated experience, if you like,
yeah.
for every single user. If you know someone wants to engage with ads, then they go down almost the ad track, and then they then also change the frequency of how they see ads. So I think the monetization bit is also fascinating.
Mm,
But I also think the other cool thing is I see is how with the rise of like 5G and all the better infrastructure, a lot of these multiplayer mobile games are becoming super, super popular, which I
yeah,
think is super cool because people are playing each other across the world in some
yeah.
of these games. And I think that's super engaging and cool.
Yeah, that's personally my favorite, I would have to say, like multiplayer type of games. So interesting stuff there, Wilfred. Last question for you here, and one that I'm sure that a lot of people would be very interested in. You recently did a case study, or AudioMob recently did a case study with Google Cloud. Can you elaborate on that? Specifically, I know, how have big data and AI solutions helped AudioMob redefine the landscape of audio ads in mobile gaming?
Yeah, so there is a number of ways that we have used big data and AI, and I think yes, the Google Cloud has definitely been a good infrastructure for us because it touches on what we said before. Where can you get infrastructure that
Yeah.
you can hit every single person in the world? Google's infrastructure is a good way of doing
There's
that,
no
right?
other there's no other choice, yeah.
Yeah, there's no other choice to really reach that many people and
Yeah.
reach them reliably. So I think that's been interesting. I also think with the reason why it's been interesting with AI is also with the amount of ads that we have. That's why we have multi-steps review process. So not only are we analyzing ads using AI and then flagging stuff up, we also have human review. So our ad
Mm,
operations actually goes through them as well. And we also the third layer we have is user reporting. So if it's made
interesting.
through all those layers, we also have the ability for someone to tap the banner and hit the info logo and report the ad. And
That's
that
really
also
interesting because a lot of companies just rely on sort of like AI to do like all the work to do with, reporting, that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. So and to be honest, AI, as we all know, is moving exponentially and getting better and better. But I also understand from my days at Google, it's also very important to just have the human element because there's
100%.
always nuances, right?
Yeah.
To anything that like language is one that is like yes, a computer can translate a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yes, they can, but there's always slight nuances and also image on the banners.
Mm,
There's always like different cultures might think that stuff are acceptable. Some things
yeah.
might be expensive. So it's really important actually just to have that human review to go, oh, actually, I can see why that's a problem in that region. Let's restrict and remove that ad, as well. So I think that's where AI has been good for the mass scale to kind of give humans a superpower to kind of review loads of things, but then ultimately still have it flagged to the human. I think also with the amount of data and scaling and like we're talking about, being able to deliver ads fast enough across different regions with different data capabilities, and different infrastructures. So countries that are, have 5G networks versus countries that only have 3G networks, and they're improving their networks, it's still, that's a really important consideration that we also have to think about. And we've seen with data, like latency of how long it takes certain regions to receive an ad. So there's
Yeah.
all of these little nuances that having that global infrastructure helps with.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great punctuation point for our podcast discussion here, Wilfrid. And I love that the sort of like overriding message and that last question was AI will help us, not replace us. So that's what we all like to hear. But thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, Wilfrid. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you on.
No, appreciate the time, and yeah, great talking to you.
And that was it for this week's Mobilize and Monetize podcast. Until next time.